everyone to the Win Via Trust podcast. I am Mike Rabinowitz, and in this podcast, I speak directly with leaders and newsmakers to provide you with both practical guidance and fresh inspiration as you think about trusting your own leadership journey. Today, we are very fortunate to talk with Keith Dozier, a good friend and currently the managing director and head of customer experience and strategy at Cigna, one of the country's largest global health service companies. His resume contains a list of great experiences and senior leadership positions, including at Cencora, at Cardinal Health, at Merck, at General Mills, and you also experiment in leading your own firm as an entrepreneur. He served in the military with his last role being a lieutenant in the engineering office. Keith also hit the books and has an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University and a Bachelor's of Science degree from Morehouse College. Keith, your career has been amazing. I only briefly mentioned your military service, as I want to specifically highlight your military service within our first set of questions. Please help us understand your decision to join the military and your experiences while serving.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that great introduction and overview of my background. A lot of praise, and I truly appreciate it. You're a great friend. To your question, my decision to join the military was one born out of limited options as a child being raised by a single mom. She didn't have any realistic way of sending me or my sister to college. So we followed in the footsteps of our older cousins, most of whom joined the military. So it was really out of lack of economic options that led me to the military. And in talking to my cousins who had been in the military, they just seemed to have grown so much from that experience. They talked so glowingly about it, and it was actually a chance to get out of South Bend, Indiana too. So it all sounded well to me as a young 18-year-old trying to figure out his way in the world.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you took up engineering in the military. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that happens when you go into the military, you take something called the ASVAB, which is the Armed Services Standardized Test. And it's a test on science, on mathematics, and language. And I was fortunate enough to score extremely high on that test. So that led me into a really unique program, the Naval Nuclear Engineering Program, and it's considered the Navy's top academic program, and was fortunate enough, blessed enough to finish top of my class in that program, which led to a full ROTC scholarship where I attended Morehouse College. So 7 years of school, 3 years of nuclear engineering, 4 years of college, and then back aboard the USS Clark as an engineering officer.
I'm not surprised you stood out. You stood out in every experience that I knew you. Can you tell me about your decision to transition your skills into the business sector?
Yeah, I can. And that kind of preceded my entry into the Navy. As a young kid, I was always fascinated by this magazine I read called Black Enterprise. And it was birthed by a guy by the name of Earl Graves, really well known in the circles that I travel in today. His perspective on the plight of African Americans, because he was someone who grew up in the 40s and the 50s. His perspective was, hey, listen, the way to really get our people out of their plight was through economic empowerment, Black wealth creation. So I was fascinated by his writings, his magazine. And so I had an interest in business at an early age. I didn't go right into business, as I mentioned, for the reasons stated earlier, but Earl Graves' magazine, Black Enterprise, was an inspiration for me to ultimately go into business.
And what was your first job outside of the military and after school?
Really great question. So when I got out of the military, I had an interest in going to B school. So I got out, started working for a company called McMaster Car Supply out of Chicago. And one of the things I said in terms of what type of companies to work for was, okay, I want to work for a company, invest in a company that was willing to invest in me. And one of the things that they offered was, hey, listen, you come work for us, we'll pay for you to go get your MBA, which was right up my alley, right what I want to do. And at that point in time, and I think even still today, Chicago had two of the best B schools in the world. It had University of Chicago, it had Northwestern, right? Can't get any better than those two. So I got into both of those schools, but ultimately I chose Northwestern because at that point in time, Northwestern was the number one business school in the country.
Mm-hmm.
University of Chicago wasn't that far behind. And, I think there's been some jostling back and forth over the years, but that experience was great. I mean, I loved every minute of it, and it really validated where my heart was.
That's great. And so tell me how you managed your career after B school.
Yeah. So after working at McMaster, I was working full time and going to school in the evening. So after I got out of B school, what happens there, Michael, I mean, you know this too.
Mm-hmm.
You start to get exposure to the world of business. I mean, all these fantastic companies come to Northwestern, they tell you about their organizations, what they've got planned, how they're going to help grow your career, make your dreams come true. And that just exploded my understanding of what the options were, right? And so I had an interest in finance. I had an interest in markets. That's where I got my MBA.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted a role where I could go into either one of those two. And so what happened was, as a function of participating in some of these recruiting events, ended up ultimately landing at Pillsbury General Mills, doing brand management, brand marketing, understanding how to lead a brand, how to grow a brand, how to manage a P&L, how to understand the marketing mix. It was a deep immersion in classical marketing, as it were, back in the day. And you really understood how to run a business. And so that was my foray into the business world after my MBA.
Well, that probably gave you a great foundation for marketing, like you said.
Yeah.
Now, did you have a mentor that was meaningful to you either at that role or later on in your career?
Yeah, I have had just great mentors. I think in the military for sure, great leaders there, because coming out of the background, I certainly needed it. But when I got to my first company, there was a guy by the name of Bill Crystal there. He was my manager at McMaster Supply. When I got to Pillsbury, the mentor there was a guy by the name of Mark Bendix and another guy, Steve Rudnicksky. They sat at the top of the organization and just got me exposure to some of the most compelling business challenges, which really helped me start to think strategically about how to manage a business, how to think through problems, how to act with agility. They were really great mentors for me, and a lot of the learnings they gave me, I still apply today.
Wow. Now, shifting a little, because our podcast is about trust, can you tell me how maybe trust is different in the military versus outside the military?
Yeah. So let me just start with how I think about trust and what that means. So when I think about trust, it really is about understanding if someone that you are engaged with has consistent behavior in terms of you being able to depend on them to do the right thing consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I think about trust. And contextually is different, but at the core it's not different, because the definition of trust applies in any context, right?
Mm-hmm.
The difference with, let's say, business, where, hey, listen, if you trust someone to bring you into the right situation because you all agree that that's what would happen, you start to understand, okay, yes, that person kept their word,
Mm-hmm.
and they've done it every time I've asked them to do something. But if you get someone that you can't trust, right, in a business context, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is business results end up being negatively impacted, whether it's in a team environment or whether or not it's with the customer. It was an important customer because there's a lack of trust there with the customer. But in the military, the difference is it has life-altering implications.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, lives on the line if you can't trust someone to do their job. So if you get something wrong because you put someone you don't trust in a situation that requires trust, that can go sideways quickly. And a whole mission can be compromised and lives can be lost. So trust is important no matter what it is, but the impact on, you know, a bad business outcome, which no one wants, but certainly no one wants to lose their life over someone that you couldn't trust. And all of a sudden you find out that person is someone you shouldn't have trusted.
Do you find that maybe because it's not as critical outside the military that trust is taken more lightly?
I think you could say that, but here's the thing about it, right? You'd have to be in both worlds to understand the difference. No one that I know in business would ever say that trust isn't important. They would put a premium on it. I mean, roles that I've been in, I've measured trust in terms of the trust we deliver to customers, trust we have as teammates that are working closely together every day. So I like to think about it, Mike, in saying, hey, listen, trust is important no matter where it is, how it is, and when it is, but certainly from the perspective of the ability to just completely alter one's life. I think the military, hands down, is where it matters the most.
It makes sense. Throughout your career, you've built a great marketing expertise and really begun to focus on customer journeys, which is such a hot topic these days.
Yeah.
How does trust play an important role in defining these journeys?
Great question. So when I do customer journey work, you think about it in the context of whenever you have a customer relationship, there are various aspects where you are going to engage the customer end to end, from the sales experience to the customer service experience, to the contracting experience, to the product delivery experience, to maybe some other aspect that defines that customer journey end to end. And at each one of those engagement points, there's an opportunity to either build trust or destroy trust. What happens along any one of those elements of trust, it can have a halo effect on those other parts of the journey, the other parts of the engagement. So you got to get it all right. And you've got to design an experience where the trust is reinforced one experience after another. So if I'm a salesperson and I tell you that something's going to happen in customer service, well, it better happen. And if I'm in customer service and I tell you somebody in contract is going to follow up for you in a certain amount of days, well, it better happen. And so that's how it all is intertwined. And you have to think about it holistically, because when you don't, then as soon as that customer feels they can't trust you anymore, then it has an impact on your brand. Because one of the things we also measure in terms of brand equity is the trust dimension, how people think about our brand, how people feel about our brand, how people talk about our brand. All those are elements of brand equity, if you will, and trust is at the center of all of it. So if you give it wrong, all that will crumble like a house of cards.
And there are a lot of statistics out there that brands that are trusted have greater than 80% likelihood of being purchased again. There's so many things that support what you're talking about. How do you specifically measure, or have you measured, trust in a brand in the past? Yeah,
so as I was mentioning, we have something called the brand tracker. And I've used it at different organizations that I've led and been a part of. But it's not the only thing you measure. But what's very, very interesting is that it correlates quite nicely with other metrics you might hear about, like net promoter score, overall likelihood to continue doing business, or customer effort score. All those things track really, really nicely together. But one thing that is really consistent is that when you tend to have more trust with your customers than your competitors do, that correlates to higher customer satisfaction, high retention rate. And when you start to calculate retention rate and you see that yours is higher than your competitors because of trust, you can start to dollarize that and say, listen, this is how much value our ability to drive better trust with our customers is delivering to the organization. So there are certainly ways to do it, and I've done it in different places that I've been, and it's one of the key metrics anybody should track if you're in business. One element is something called the competitive comparison trust score. So essentially what we do, we say, are we more trusted than our competitors on a range of issues like innovation, like speed of issue resolution, like product returns. And so when you can say if we're better or worse than our competitors, it's done on, let's say, a 5-point scale where you take the top 2 box percentage. Let's say that's 50% that say you're better, and then you have a bottom 2 box that says you're worse by 20%. Then you've got a net difference of 30 points. So it's measure of order of magnitude. So we're 30 points better than our competitors on these issues. And so we know we've got an advantage, and some of it will rate you the same. So it's really about the top two and the bottom two that you're measuring. But it really gives you a sense, especially when you start to track it over time, longitudinally, to see how you're performing. And so those are ways that we've measured it in the past. And it's really been something that our leaders who are over various lines of business, want to learn about and track and keep an understanding of, because we can also understand what's driving your trust scores up or down and be able to say, listen, in order to improve your trust, you need to really emphasize, let's say, speed of issue resolution to get that trust score back up. So to be very accurate in terms of here's what's impacting your trust score.
You've had teams, sometimes very large teams, sometimes small teams, but you've been managing teams and organizations throughout most of your career. How do you establish trust within your team?
Yeah, it goes back to the definition of trust, right? Where I said before, being consistent in your behavior in terms of doing the right thing as consistently as possible. And I know not everybody gets it right all the time, right? But what happens is that trust is something you build over time. It's not a one-time thing, right? It's not something that, hey, listen, I do one thing right one time and all of a sudden I trust you. No, it's something that plays out over time. And so what I do with teams is try to be really, really consistent in terms of what I told them I'm going to do. But also, as I mentioned, in terms of the relationship part, people really look at trust as a character metric, right? And if someone says, hey, listen, you have a character that says you can be trusted, it certainly is associated with a lot of other things too, like that person also cares about me. And there's a lot of ways you can demonstrate that you care about someone, because then they'll also connote that with trust. And so I've tried to do that in every place that I've been. And I would like to say, at least the feedback that I've gotten is that I've been consistent in that, and that results in me always having really high performing teams. And I take a lot of pride in that, because I would much rather do something that establishes and keeps trust with my team than, let's say, get a promotion or get invited to a meeting with some other high executives or something like that. That means much less to me than having good trusting relationships with my team. And I think that's where my head has always been.
Well, I'm not surprised. It speaks to your character and a lot of other great qualities that you have. But in the course of you managing people, you must have had some people that weren't trustworthy. How did you deal with that with those employees?
Yeah. Well, with those employees, I'll talk about it at two levels. Number one is, because I've experienced this much more than I have with my employees. Trust issues I've had have been with managers or leaders that have been over me.
Oh.
And people who are taking shortcuts want me to adopt the way of management of people and treatment of people that is completely inconsistent with how I lead and how I want to develop relationships. And in those situations, trust was hard to come by. And ultimately, I've had to say, listen, this isn't something that's consistent with my leadership philosophy. And quite frankly, it created friction. Ultimately, those things work themselves out. Either they move on or I move on. For the most part, for whatever reason, they've had to move to different positions or they left the company, but they tend to resolve themselves. And so, all I would say is, whenever someone is creating an environment where you can't trust them, stick to your principles, stick to what you believe in, never compromise on trust, on character. Those things matter so much. And at the end of the day, they will pay dividends to you. I'm a testament of it, because I've never compromised on those types of things. And while I've had to take a short-term hit, and I have, on the long run, it's played out for me. That's at the leadership level. Now, people that have worked for me that I couldn't trust, those have been hard conversations, but I don't sugarcoat it. I had a guy working for me one time who was cheating on his hours, filing false reports, and I called him out on it, and I got rid of him. Because at that point in time, you realize that, hey, listen, the contract of trust was established up front and that person violated it. So sometimes it's black and white. The problem sometimes is when it's gray, where you say, okay, well, this person, did they know any better? Were they told what to do? And so you feel like initially you want to try to make sure you train them up so that, hey, listen, I can put you in a situation of trust. Because now, once I've addressed the issue of, maybe it was my fault they didn't understand what they were supposed to do, and so I couldn't trust them. But once you've gone through the process of giving you the training, I've given you the direction, I've showed you how to do it, and if they still can't do it, and then that makes me not trust them, then that person is someone that is in the wrong job. And so I've had to remove people like that out of the organization, off my team.
Makes tremendous sense. Now, shifting gears a bit, because you're at this cross section as well, in terms of seeing the rapid advance of the capabilities of AI.
Yeah.
And we all see some of the hallucination rates and are somewhat concerned with too quick of adoption. But tell me, how do you think AI will change the market, and where do you think it'll have its most value?
Yeah, well, it's changing it right now. It's rapid adoption. Everybody's applying it everywhere. But interestingly enough, I just took a certification course back at our alma mater in AI and its application to business growth. It was a fascinating 8 weeks of taking that certification course. But what I came out understanding is, AI isn't the answer to every question, even though it's been widely adopted. So it just gave me a lens in terms of the right questions to ask and to understand where it makes sense to apply once you take a pretty rigorous approach of, okay, can AI help us here? But where I've seen it most on the research side is, can we apply it in terms of some of the repetitive things that we do in terms of storing documents in a research repository, document retrieval? Can it help us go through a list of questions that are in the question bank and pick out the ones that are associated with, let's say, product satisfaction? So there's a number of different applications for it. I'm just talking about my world where I'm focused on research now in my current role. But in terms of the marketing side, kind of panning out a little bit larger, I've seen it used in persona development. I've seen it used across the whole end-to-end process of the marketing process, from segmentation to campaign measurement. I've seen it apply end to end. But to your point about hallucinations, you got to be really careful about whether or not it's giving you something that's actually unique, new, and different. I think people are running headlong into it and not really always understanding whether or not they're getting something back that's totally useful. That's where I think experience comes in, because if you've done enough marketing, you've done enough management of business and P&Ls, and you've thought through a lot of strategic questions, some things are going to come back from AI that won't make sense. And you can't just surrender your mind to whatever comes out from the query.
Yeah, that bears out in a lot of the information I'm reading. Unlike most technologies that are executed, like cell phones or whatever, the more you use AI, the less you trust it.
Yeah,
now, I think there's a learning curve associated with that, with asking the right questions and keeping the scope within what it's best capable of. But there's a lot of truth there and a lot of learning still to be had. Well, you've been a great interview, Keith. But before we close, I want to ask you, is there any question about trust that we didn't ask you that you would like to offer some closing remarks on?
Yeah, I'll say this. I think trust is the cipher for any successful relationship, be that relationship personal, business, or spiritual. I come at this as a Christian with the Christian worldview. And so I think about it first from that standard where it says, trust in the Lord. And that simple statement, trust in the Lord, and He will guide your steps. I really have adopted that. And I've been able to apply it to every aspect of my life. And it's why I think one of the reasons I've been blessed. So that would be the last thing that I would offer on trust.
Well, that's a great thing to end us with. Thanks, Keith. It's hard to believe this is your first podcast. You're such a pro. A great interview, really. Let me just close to say this has been Mike Rabinowitz on the Win Via Trust podcast. Please remember to subscribe to future podcasts and blogs at winviatrust.com. Thanks, everyone.